Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're all listening from today, so please drop a comment. My son, David, told me he was too busy to answer my calls for weeks on end, even when he knew I needed him. He was my only child, the center of my world after his father passed. I'd always done everything for him, perhaps too much. So, when his calls went straight to voicemail, day after day, while I was paying his mortgage, a certain kind of cold clarity began to settle in my heart. He was too busy for his mother? Fine. I decided I was far too busy to keep bankrolling the life of a son who couldn't spare 5 minutes for me. But I wasn't finished just by stopping the payments. Oh no. This is the story of how I made him understand that a mother's love and her resources are not infinite, especially when met with such profound disrespect. The silence from David's end started subtly, like a dripping tap you barely notice until the sink is overflowing. At first, it was just a missed call here, a text replied to a day late there. Swamped at work, Mom, he'd say, or big project deadline, can't talk. I understood, or at least I told myself I did. He was building his career, his life with Sarah, his wife. I remembered what it was like, those busy years when my own late husband, Tom, and I were juggling work and raising David. We'd barely had time to breathe, but we always made time for family. Especially for our parents. A quick call to check in, a Sunday dinner, a helping hand when needed. These were the threads that kept the family fabric strong. I'd assumed David had absorbed those values. When Tom passed 5 years ago, David had been a rock for a while. He'd helped with the funeral arrangements, stayed with me for a week, promised he'd always be there. And for the first year or so, he was. Regular visits, frequent calls. Then he met Sarah. Sarah was ambitious. For David, for herself, for their lifestyle. Slowly, the visits became less frequent, the calls shorter. I tried not to be the clinging mother, the lonely widow. I had my friends, my garden, my books. But a mother's heart yearns for her child, no matter how old they are. The mortgage payments for his smart townhouse in the city had started 3 years ago. He and Sarah had their eye on it, but the deposit was steep and the monthly payments were a stretch. It's an investment, Mom, David had said, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Property values are only going up, and it would mean so much to us to have a stable home. Tom and I had always been careful with money. We'd saved, invested wisely. I had a comfortable nest egg, and the house Tom and I built together was paid off. Helping David felt like the right thing to do, a continuation of Tom's legacy of providing for his family. So, I'd agreed to cover the mortgage payments for 5 years, to give them a leg up. Just until you're more settled, dear, I'd said. He'd been so grateful then, hugging me tightly, promising I was the best mom in the world. Those words echoed hollowly now as another call went to his voicemail, the cheerful, professionally recorded message grating on my nerves. Hi, you've reached David. I'm unable to take your call right now, but please leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, as soon as he could. When would that be? The silence grew louder in the ensuing weeks. It wasn't just missed calls anymore. It was a complete blackout. I'd leave messages. David, dear, just calling to see how you are. Give me a ring when you have a moment then, as a small worry started to niggle. David, is everything all right? Haven't heard from you. Call me. My 70th birthday came and went. I'd half expected, half hoped for a surprise visit, or at least a long call. Instead, a courier delivered a generic bouquet of flowers with a card signed love. David and Sarah, no call. Not even a text. The flowers were beautiful, expensive, but they felt cold, impersonal. My friend Eleanor came over for tea, and I tried to put on a brave face. Lovely flowers from David, I said, gesturing towards them. Eleanor, bless her pragmatic heart, just raised an eyebrow. Did he call Martha? I shook my head, a lump forming in my throat. He's very busy, you know. Work. Eleanor, who had known me since before David was born, who had seen me pour my life into that boy, just patted my hand. There's busy, dear, and then there's too busy for your own mother on her milestone birthday. Don't make excuses for him. Her words, though gentle, stung because they were true. I was making excuses. I was clinging to the image of the loving, attentive son he once was, or who I believed him to be. The truth was, the son I knew seemed to be fading, replaced by a stranger who lived in a smart townhouse financed by my generosity, yet couldn't find the time to acknowledge my existence beyond a pre-ordered floral arrangement. The house felt emptier than usual that week. Tom's absence, a familiar ache, was now compounded by David's. I'd wander through the rooms, remembering David's first steps in the living room, his scraped knees patched up in the kitchen, the late-night talks we'd had when he was a teenager, wrestling with his future. I had always been there, unfailingly. And now? It wasn't just about wanting to chat. A genuine need had arisen. The old oak tree in my backyard, the one Tom had planted when David was born, had a large branch threatening to come down over the fence into Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning rose garden. I was worried sick about it. I couldn't manage a ladder anymore, not with my knee acting up, and the tree surgeons I'd called were quoting exorbitant prices, or had long waiting lists. It was something David could have assessed, perhaps even helped with temporarily securing, or at least given me some advice on. "David," I said into his voicemail again, my voice a little more strained this time. "There's a problem with the big oak in the garden. I really need your advice, perhaps your help. It looks like it might come down. Please call me." It's rather urgent. Days passed. No call. The silence was no longer just neglect. It felt like a deliberate severing. My anxiety over the oak tree grew with each passing day, especially when the wind picked up. I'd lie in bed at night, listening to the creak and groan of the branches, imagining the crash, the damage, Mrs. Henderson's understandable upset. This wasn't just a casual, "How are you?" call he was ignoring anymore. This was a genuine request for help, a situation causing me real stress. I left another message, my voice tighter. "David, the tree situation is getting worse. I really need to hear from you. I'm worried." Still nothing. It was Eleanor who eventually helped me sort it out. She called her nephew, who ran a landscaping business, and he came over the next day, assessed the tree, and gave me a reasonable quote to have the dangerous limb removed. He was a kind young man, polite and efficient, and as he worked, I couldn't help but compare his prompt helpfulness to David's utter silence. The cost of the tree work ate into my monthly budget, a budget that was already significantly impacted by the large sum I transferred each month for David's mortgage. As I wrote the check to Eleanor's nephew, a new thought, cold and sharp, began to crystallize. I was managing my finances, dealing with household emergencies, and navigating my worries all alone, while a substantial portion of my income was ensuring my son lived comfortably, apparently without a care in the world for my well-being. The unfairness of it settled heavily in my chest. One afternoon, feeling particularly low, I decided to do something I rarely did. I looked up David on social media. Sarah was quite active online, always posting pictures of their seemingly perfect life. My heart sank. There they were, David and Sarah, smiling broadly from a sun-drenched beach in some exotic location. The post was dated just 2 days ago. "Escaping the grind. #blessed #Vaki mode." Sarah had captioned it. 2 days ago. That was when I had left my most urgent message about the tree. He wasn't swamped at work. He was on holiday, sipping cocktails by the ocean, while his mother was back home, worried sick about a falling tree and his inexplicable silence. The casual cruelty of it, the blatant disregard, was like a physical blow. He hadn't even bothered to send a quick text. "Hi mom, away on holiday, we'll call when I'm back." Nothing. Just silence from his end, while his happy, carefree life, partly funded by me, was broadcast for all the world to see. That was the moment something snapped within me. The hurt didn't disappear, but it was overlaid with a layer of icy resolve. The image of him on that beach, juxtaposed with my own anxieties and his ignored pleas, played over and over in my mind. He was too busy enjoying a life I was helping to pay for, too busy to even acknowledge a genuine problem I was facing. The mortgage. The word itself now tasted like ash in my mouth. It wasn't an investment in his future anymore. It felt like a payment for his indifference. The transition from deep hurt to quiet determination wasn't instantaneous, but that image of David on the beach, so carefree while I worried, was the catalyst. It was the last straw, the one that broke the weary back of my maternal indulgence. For days, I replayed our recent history, his growing distance, my unanswered calls, the flimsy excuses, and now this, a holiday flaunted while I was in genuine need of his support. It wasn't just about the tree anymore, or the unanswered calls. It was about a fundamental breakdown of respect, of filial duty, of simple human decency. I had poured my love, my time, and a significant portion of my financial resources into David, always believing I was nurturing a bond that would sustain us both. Now, it felt as if I had been watering a barren plant. The sacrifices I'd made, big and small, paraded through my mind. The promotions I'd passed on when he was young so I could be home more, the inheritance from my own mother that had gone towards his university fees, the countless times I'd put his needs, his desires, before my own. Not with resentment then, but with love. Now, that love felt foolish, unreciprocated. Why was I continuing to enable this? Why was I funding a lifestyle for a son who treated me like an inconvenient afterthought, an ATM that required no personal interaction? The money I sent him each month for his mortgage was a considerable sum. It was money that could go towards my own comfort, my own security, perhaps even my own enjoyments, things I'd long deferred. Perhaps a little trip of my own, not to an exotic beach, but maybe to visit my sister in Yorkshire, whom I hadn't seen in years because travel felt like an extravagance. Or I could finally get the walk-in shower I desperately needed, as climbing into the bath was becoming a perilous exercise for my aging knees. These weren't selfish thoughts. They were thoughts of self-preservation, of reclaiming a little of what I had so freely given away. My resolve hardened. This wasn't about punishing David, not really. It was about redressing a balance, about teaching a lesson he was clearly too busy to learn otherwise. It was about valuing myself, my peace of mind, and my own needs. If he was too busy for me, then perhaps it was time for me to be too busy managing his financial obligations. The decision, once it took root, felt surprisingly liberating. A weight I hadn't fully acknowledged began to lift. I wasn't just a passive victim of his neglect anymore. I was about to become an active agent in my own life. The first step was to understand the mechanics of the mortgage payment. I remembered setting it up as a direct debit from my main current account. Simple enough to cancel, I presumed. I pulled out my bank statements, the familiar line item for mortgage assist, David Henderson, glaring up at me. It was due to go out on the 28th of each month. Today was the 15th. I had time. My first call wasn't to the bank, but to Eleanor. I needed a sounding board, someone who understood, someone who wouldn't just offer platitudes but practical, sensible advice. We met for coffee at our usual little cafe, the one with the slightly wobbly tables and the best scones in town. I laid it all out for her. The weeks of silence, the ignored birthday, the tree incident, the galling holiday photos, and finally, my decision to stop the mortgage payments. Eleanor listened patiently, her expression growing sterner as my story unfolded. When I finished, she took a slow sip of her tea. "Martha," she said, her voice firm but kind. "It's about bloody time," I blinked, surprised by her vehemence. "You've coddled that boy for far too long. Tom, bless his soul, did too. David's a grown man with a wife and a good job, from what you've said. If he can afford lavish holidays, he can afford his own damn mortgage. But he'll be furious," I said, a flicker of my old anxiety returning. "He might even lose the house," Eleanor snorted delicately. "Then perhaps he'll learn a valuable lesson about priorities, won't he? And whose fault would it be, Martha? Yours, for finally putting your own well-being first? Or his, for treating his mother like a disposable convenience?" Her words were like a tonic. She didn't try to talk me out of it, didn't suggest I try one more time with David. She validated my feelings, my decision. "What's the practical side?" she asked. "How do you pay it?" I explained about the direct debit. "Right," she said. "First thing tomorrow, you call your bank. Or better yet, go in person. Cancel it. Don't give them a reason if you don't want to, just cancel it. It's your money, your account." We talked about the potential fallout. David's anger, Sarah's inevitable involvement. Eleanor suggested I write down exactly why I was doing this, not for David, but for myself, so if my resolve wavered, I could remind myself. And Martha, she added, her eyes twinkling, that money you'll be saving? Put it towards that walk-in shower. And a trip to see your sister. You deserve it. Walking home from the cafe, I felt stronger, more resolute than I had in years. Eleanor's unwavering support had been crucial. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident. I walked to the bank, my heart thumping a little, but my steps were firm. I asked to speak to the branch manager, a pleasant young woman named Ms. Davies. I explained calmly and clearly that I wished to cancel a specific direct debit. She tapped away at her computer. "This is for a mortgage payment, Mrs. Henderson," she noted, perhaps a little surprised. "Are you sure?" "Perfectly sure. Thank you," I replied, my voice steady. She asked no more questions, and a few minutes later, it was done. The direct debit for David's mortgage, due on the 28th, was canceled. As I walked out of the bank, the sunshine felt brighter, the air fresher. A profound sense of relief washed over me. It was done. The first decisive step had been taken. Now, I had to decide whether to inform David or let him discover it when the payment failed to arrive. I spent the next few days in a state of quiet anticipation, mixed with a strange sense of peace. The decision to cancel the mortgage payment was made, the action taken. Now, it was a matter of waiting. I decided against informing David directly. Why should I? He hadn't afforded me the courtesy of communication for weeks. Let him discover the consequence of his neglect himself. It felt like a more fitting lesson. If I called or texted him to say, "By the way, son, I'm no longer paying your mortgage because you're an inconsiderate brat," it would invite an immediate argument, a barrage of excuses or false apologies, and potentially, I might even be swayed by some well-practiced guilt trip. No, silence felt more powerful, a mirror to his own. Instead, I focused on myself. I called my sister, Beatrice, in Yorkshire. "Bea," I said, "how would you feel about a visitor in a couple of weeks?" Her delighted shriek was all the answer I needed. We hadn't seen each other in nearly 3 years, life and distance always getting in the way. Now, with the prospect of several £100s a month back in my own pocket, the train fare and a little spending money no longer seemed like an insurmountable hurdle. I also started researching walk-in showers. I gathered brochures, read online reviews, and even visited a local showroom. The thought of a safe, accessible shower, one I wouldn't dread using, filled me with a simple, practical joy. These were tangible things for me. Things that David's mortgage payments had, in a way, been preventing. Eleanor checked in on me regularly. "Any explosions yet?" She'd ask, a humorous glint in her eye. "Not yet," I'd reply. The 28th is D-Day. We both knew the bank would likely notify David fairly quickly once the payment was missed. They wouldn't let a mortgage default slide for long. I did feel a pang of something akin to nervousness as the 28th approached. What if he called, suddenly full of contrition, before the payment was officially missed? Would I backtrack? I examined my heart and found, to my own surprise, a firmness there that hadn't existed before. No, I wouldn't backtrack. This wasn't a rash decision made in anger. It was a considered response to prolonged disrespect. He needed to understand that actions, or in his case, inactions, have consequences. On the evening of the 27th, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in my living room, Tom's old armchair surprisingly comforting. I looked around at the home we had built, filled with memories. This house was mine, paid for through years of hard work and shared dreams. David's townhouse, on the other hand, was a symbol of his ambition, an ambition I had helped fuel, but which now seemed to have consumed his sense of filial responsibility. I felt a sadness for the relationship we had lost, or perhaps the relationship I had imagined we had. But overriding that sadness was a sense underscore of impending justice, not a harsh, vengeful justice, but a quiet rebalancing of the scales. I was taking back control, not just of my finances, but of my dignity. The 28th came and went. I knew the direct debit would have been attempted and, finding no instruction, would have failed. I imagined the electronic equivalent of a shrug from my bank account. I spent the day gardening, trying to keep my mind occupied, though a part of me was constantly attuned to the telephone, half expecting it to shrill into life. Nothing. The 29th passed in similar silence. Then, on the afternoon of the 30th, my phone finally rang. The caller ID displayed David. My heart gave a little flutter, not of fear, but of readiness. I let it ring 3 times before answering, taking a slow, calming breath. "Hello," I said, my voice deliberately neutral. "Mom." David's voice was tight, strained, not his usual casual or dismissive tone. "Mom, what the hell is going on? The bank just called me. They said the mortgage payment was returned. Did you cancel it? Is there a problem with your account?" There was no preamble, no "Hi Mom, how are you?" no apology for his weeks of silence. Just straight to the money. Just as I and Eleanor had predicted.
No, David, irreplica calmly.
"There's no problem with my account. I canceled the direct debit." There was a stunned silence on the other end. I could almost hear him processing my words. Then the explosion. "You canceled it? Are you serious? Why would you do that? Without even telling me? I could lose the house, Mom. What were you thinking?" His voice rose with each question, a mixture of disbelief and fury. I let him vent for a moment, then I said, quietly but firmly, "David, for the past 6 weeks, I've been trying to reach you. I left numerous messages. My 70th birthday passed without so much as a phone call from you. I had an urgent problem with the oak tree in the garden, a tree your father planted, and you couldn't be bothered to return my calls. I saw pictures of you and Sarah on holiday, living it up, while you were apparently too busy to speak to your own mother. So, yes, David, I canceled the payment, but that's my house, Mom," he sputtered, incredulous. "I rely on that money. We budgeted for it. You promised." "I promised to help you get a leg up, David, not to fund your lifestyle indefinitely while you treat me with utter contempt," I stated, my voice gaining strength. "A relationship is a two-way street. You seem to have forgotten that. You were too busy for me, so I decided I was too busy to continue paying for a house for a son who clearly has no time or respect for his mother. This is unbelievable," he raged. "You're trying to ruin my life. After everything you've done for me, this is how you repay me?" The sheer audacity of that last statement almost made me laugh. "Repay you, David? I think you have that backwards. I have done nothing but support you your entire life. Perhaps it's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet and, more importantly, to treat people, especially your family, with a modicum of consideration." He was spluttering now, a string of incoherent protests and accusations. "Sarah is going to go insane. We can't afford this payment on our own right now." "Then perhaps you and Sarah should reconsider your spending habits," I suggested coolly. "Fewer exotic holidays, perhaps? Or maybe Sarah could contribute more. You're both adults, David. This is your responsibility now." The line went quiet for a moment. Then he said, his voice laced with a new, venomous tone, "You'll regret this, Mom. You'll be all alone and you'll regret this, David," I said, and my voice was sad now, but still firm. "I have felt alone for weeks, despite having a son. This changes nothing in that regard, except that I will have a bit more peace and a bit more money for my own needs. The only person who should have regrets here is you. Goodbye, David," and I gently hung up the phone. My hand was trembling slightly, but a profound sense of rightness settled over me. The storm had broken, and I had weathered it. The silence that followed my call with David was heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the silence of a battle fought and, in its own way, won. I knew this was far from over in terms of his reaction, but my part, the difficult confrontation, was done. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that I had stood up for myself, sorrow that it had come to this. I called Eleanor immediately. "Well," I said, "the eagle has landed, or rather, the mortgage payment hasn't, and the eaglet is screaming." Eleanor chuckled. "And how did you handle the screaming, my dear?" I recounted the conversation. David's outrage, his sense of entitlement, his final, rather pathetic threat. He actually said I'd regret it? Eleanor scoffed. The unmitigated gall of that boy. You did wonderfully, Martha. You were calm, you were clear, and you stood your ground. I'm proud of you. Her words were a balm. Over the next few days, I braced myself for further fallout. I expected more angry calls, perhaps a visit. But there was nothing. Silence again, but this time it was a hostile, resentful silence, not the negligent silence of before. It was better, in a way. At least now we were both clear on where we stood. A week later, a letter arrived. It was typed, formal, and reeked of Sarah's influence. It was a long, self-pitying diatribe about my cruelty, my lack of understanding, how I had jeopardized their future, how they had always loved and respected me, a claim that now rang utterly hollow. It accused me of being manipulative and using money to control them. It ended with a demand that I reinstate the payments immediately. If you have any maternal feeling left at all, I read it once, then twice. The accusations stung, but they didn't penetrate my newfound resolve. Maternal feeling? I had given him 30-odd years of it, unstintingly. What I lacked now wasn't maternal feeling, but tolerance for blatant disrespect and exploitation. I didn't reply to the letter. What was there to say? I had already said my piece. Instead, I booked my train ticket to Yorkshire and called a reputable local builder to come and give me a quote for the walk-in shower. I started to reclaim my life, piece by piece. The money that had been automatically siphoned off to David's mortgage now sat in my account, a visible symbol of my liberation. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference, enough to give me choices I hadn't had before. I found myself humming as I went about my days. The constant low-level anxiety about David, about our deteriorating relationship, had lessened. It was still there, a dull ache for what was lost, but it was no longer all-consuming. I had drawn a line, and in doing so, I had reclaimed a part of myself, the part that knew her own worth. The trip to Yorkshire to visit Beatrice was a revelation. It had been so long since I'd had a proper holiday, a break from my routine, from the quiet confines of my home which, in recent months, had felt more like a waiting room for David's infrequent and inadequate attention. Beatrice was overjoyed to see me, and we slipped back into our sisterly rhythm as if no time had passed at all. We talked for hours, reminiscing about our childhood, catching up on family news, and inevitably, I told her the whole sorry tale about David. Beatrice, ever practical and forthright like Eleanor, was indignant on my behalf. "Good for you, Martha," she declared. He needed a rude awakening. Some children think their parents are just walking, talking bank accounts with an endless supply of patience. It's a shock when they find out otherwise. Her unreserved support was yet another layer of affirmation for the difficult decision I had made. We visited quaint villages, walked, gently, in the dales, enjoyed pub lunches, and simply relished each other's company. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly light, unburdened by the weight of David's disregard and my own complicity in enabling it. When I returned home, refreshed and rejuvenated, the builder was ready to start on my new walk-in shower. The transformation of my bathroom was symbolic of the larger transformation happening within me. Out went the old, difficult-to-access bathtub, a source of daily anxiety, and in came a sleek, safe, modern shower, a symbol of my new independence and focus on my own well-being. Using it for the first time was a small but profound joy. No more fear of slipping, no more struggling. Just ease and comfort. I didn't hear directly from David or Sarah. The silence from their end was complete. However, news has a way of trickling through in small towns and interconnected families. My cousin, who lived near David and Sarah, mentioned in a Christmas card that David seemed very stressed and that there were rumors they might be selling their townhouse. "Too much for them to manage, I suppose," she wrote, oblivious to the backstory. I felt a brief pang, not of guilt, but of a lingering sadness for David's choices. He had a good job. Sarah worked too. They could have managed the mortgage if they had been more prudent, if their lifestyle hadn't been predicated on my contribution. Perhaps they had to learn to live within their actual means, not their inflated expectations. My life, meanwhile, continued to improve in small but significant ways. With the extra money each month, I treated myself to things I'd previously foregone. Better quality groceries, a new coat for the winter, a subscription to a concert series Eleanor and I had always wanted to attend. I even started a pottery class at the local community center, something I'd fancied for years. My hands, often trembling with age or worry, found a new purpose in shaping the clay, and I discovered a surprising talent for it. My world, which had shrunk to the size of my anxieties about David, began to expand again. My peace wasn't just about the absence of David's demands or the presence of a little extra money. It was deeper than that. It was the peace that comes from aligning your actions with your self-respect. I had spent so many years prioritizing David, making his needs paramount, that I had forgotten to prioritize myself. This whole painful episode had been a harsh but necessary corrective. I found myself more engaged with my friends, more active in my community. The pottery class led to new acquaintances, women my age with their own stories, their own joys and sorrows. We'd often go for coffee after class, sharing our creations and our lives. I was no longer just David's mother. I was Martha, a woman with her own interests, her own life. One afternoon, about 6 months after the fateful phone call, I received an unexpected visitor. It was David. He stood on my doorstep, looking thinner, tired, and decidedly less confident than I'd ever seen him. He wasn't angry anymore. He just looked defeated. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet. "Can I come in?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded and stepped aside. We sat in the living room, the silence awkward. He didn't look at the new photographs on the mantelpiece, one of Beatrice and me laughing in Yorkshire, another of my first, rather lopsided, pottery vase. Finally, he spoke. "We're selling the house," he said, staring at his hands. "We can't keep up with the payments and, well, everything else, I see," I replied, keeping my voice even. "I'm sorry to hear that it came to that, David." He looked up then, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something other than entitlement in his eyes. Was it regret? Shame? I handled things badly, Mom, he admitted, the words seemingly costing him a great deal. "I took you for granted. I was a terrible son." It wasn't the effusive, insincere apology I might have expected when he was trying to manipulate me before. This felt different, raw. I didn't rush to absolve him. I simply listened. "Sarah and we got caught up," he continued, stumbling over his words. "The lifestyle, trying to keep up appearances. And I forgot what was important." He paused. "I miss you, Mom." Those 3 words, spoken so softly, hit me harder than all his previous anger. This was the son I remembered, the vulnerable boy beneath the arrogant man. "I missed you too, David," I said, my voice gentle. For a very long time before I stopped the payments, we talked for a while longer that afternoon. It wasn't a complete reconciliation, not yet. The wounds were too deep for that. But it was a start, a fragile, tentative step towards rebuilding something. He didn't ask for money. He didn't make excuses. He just talked and I listened. He told me they were looking for a smaller apartment, something they could genuinely afford. He mentioned he'd started calling his grandmother, Sarah's mom, more often. Small changes. When he left, there was no dramatic hug, no promises of a perfect future. But as I watched him walk away, I felt a sense of quiet hope, not just for him, but for the possibility that he might finally be growing up. My peace, however, was no longer contingent on him. I had found my own, and it was strong, rooted in self-worth and the quiet joy of a life lived authentically. The vindication wasn't in his struggle, but in my own serenity. I had faced the betrayal, made a difficult choice, and emerged not bitter, but stronger and more at peace with myself than I had been in years. My life was mine again, and that was the greatest victory of all. And as for what happened next with David, well, that, as they say, is another story for another time. Thank you for listening to mine. Please, if you've enjoyed this, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next video.